Hi, I'm Najla. I'm an engineering manager at Etsy, and today we're going to talk about the human side of our on-call practices. Over the years, we've been conditioned to move fast and break things, but let's explore what happens when the things we're breaking are our people and our teams. Let's start at the beginning. In case you're unfamiliar, in software we use these things called on-call rotations to alert team members when something goes wrong, and the whole point is to mitigate risk as quickly as possible. To give you an example, at Etsy we monitor how many buyers are shopping on the site. Obviously, the more the better. We would want to configure an alert that tells us if the number of buyers unexpectedly goes down. And if it does, that alert would go off, an engineer would get paged on their phone, and the engineer would try and follow a playbook for that type of alert, which tells them where to start investigating, like checking to see if there's an outage with their cloud provider. Once they have a hunch about what the issue is, the engineer would do their best to mitigate that issue and then share their findings with the bigger team. If you're new to on-call rotations, it does sound a bit scary and intimidating, but needing this process isn't inherently a bad thing. As engineers, we choose to let some edge cases slide or to not proactively fix every bug, especially when we're unsure if they're important. Instead, we consciously set up alerts as a catch-all, kind of rolling the dice to see if we'll even reach those code paths in production. And when we're under particular pressure to deliver quickly, this happens more often, so teams will end up with a noisier set of pages and alerts. It's a totally acceptable way to approach software development as long as we give the process the care it needs along the way. I want to tell you about my team at Etsy. We're a highly business-critical group that maintains really complex machine learning pipelines and systems. Basically, if our systems are down, we lose a lot of money. And a year and a half ago when I joined this team, there were 5 people in the on-call rotation. They were getting paged a lot, often in the middle of the night. Basically, in a given week, you were really likely to get paged. This graph has real data that shows how often we were getting paged in the first 4 months of 2019. The red parts are outside of working hours, so you can see that they're a pretty big part of the total number of pages. While we were keeping the lights on with our rotation, there was a human cost to consider for those 5 people. So a lot of times folks are just getting paged at the office, which can feel disruptive or like they're not getting enough time to do their work. It's not ideal, but we know how to work around that. As employees, we kind of accept that that's just part of the deal. However, on-call rotations, by definition, blur the lines between work and personal life. Aside from that in-office disruption, an on-call engineer can anticipate getting paged at any time, and they're expected to be responsive within 5 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever their team decides is necessary. If you've been on these rotations like I have, and you've had to wake up at 4 a.m. to resolve an issue, you know how easy it is to burn out. And this type of disruption doesn't only set the stage for burnout at a large scale. As a manager, we will ultimately blow through our social capital and will fail to retain the people who are on our team. So in this case, it was a clear problem. The same few people responsible for owning a huge part of the site were also bogged down by stress and interrupts from our on-call rotation. Okay, so we identified that we had this problem on my team at Etsy, and there were a few things that we could do. The first option is always to do nothing. So even though it might feel like incidents are being handled well enough, keeping things stagnant while a team and codebase are constantly evolving is kind of risky. Pages keep accumulating, people are just getting by, and resentment can grow. Another option that's common is to take a data center approach. We love this in engineering because we love to quantify things. For example, we can pull the data to see how many pages we currently have, and we can set a goal to reduce that. However, it kind of misses the mark because it's possible to reduce the number of pages without ever resolving the central people issue that we identified. So pages can still be down, but stress can still be high. The last option I'll propose is to take a human-centered approach. My belief is that we can improve our on-call rotations by focusing on the people who participate in them. In taking this kind of approach, we use data along the way, but we're explicitly solving people problems. I'm going to walk you through how we did this on my team and why it works. In this case, our goal, again, was to mitigate the biggest human pain point as quickly as possible, that a few folks were taking on a huge load. So the first thing we did was expand coverage by taking advantage of the team's new, larger size. We had recently expanded from 5 to 15, so we reduced frequency by quite a bit for each person. While this took the load off of a small group of people, it turns out that throwing a bunch of new folks into these types of things has a lot of challenges, and I was one of them, so I was experiencing them firsthand. It wasn't just our lack of familiarity with the alerts since we were new, The on-call team had grown so quickly that we didn't really know how to work together. We didn't know how to ask for help from each other. We didn't know how to escalate from each other when something was going wrong. And we hadn't answered basic questions around response time, so people didn't know if they could step away from their laptops for a short time. I think most importantly, there was ambiguity around what exactly you should do when you got paged, especially since new folks had less context on the code. So in trying to solve one problem, we uncovered a lot more around training and team norms. But now trying to fix all of this up front felt even more daunting. We realized that we needed a more structured way to get feedback from the team, outside of one-on-ones where people were already sharing their stress around the process. So we hosted an on-call specific retro. Okay, if you don't know what a retro is, I love these and I use them for everything. They're basically these meetings where we anonymously write out our problems as a group and vote on which are most important to us. We do this instead of having a free-form discussion to give everyone a chance to be represented. And it's a cherry on top that we get to look at everybody's thoughts out in the open and find patterns. You can see direct quotes from my team here where they question the status quo of our existing alerts. Could these be mitigated more proactively? How many need to appear in the middle of the night? Why are we getting alerted on these if there's nothing that we can do about them? Since there's a voting process in retros, we also get this nice, natural prioritization of all the feedback we receive. And the most critical thing became really apparent. That a lot of pages felt unactionable and out of context, and that led people to feel like they were wasting time, exacerbating the underlying stress of being on call. This is the aha moment where we really understood the root of the problem, and then, with it top of mind, we were able to dig into the data to supplement our thinking. So we looked into a lot of things. We had page diversity, the number of off-hours pages, the most frequent alerts over the past quarter, and a lot of other metrics. If you're looking at these and it feels overwhelming and hard to absorb, that's because it is. And if we had started here as a team, we probably would have gone down the wrong path. Because of the retro feedback, we knew how to actually sift through the data to make it useful. We knew that the team needed small tweaks that would make a big impact on how valuably we were using their time. And what this helped us decide is that we could focus all of our solution efforts on the most frequent recent pages, the thinking being that those are where we'd have the biggest bang for our buck. From there, we basically made a plan to tune only the top few alerts from the past quarter. Tuning can mean a lot of things, like modifying the page times to only be during working hours, having the pages retry several times before trying to contact a human, fixing the underlying code if the alert was caused by a bug, or deleting the alert completely if we were never acting on it. If we did keep the alert, engineers were assigned to revise their playbooks with the goal of making those instructions digestible by anyone on the team. We also committed to writing and sharing documentation, especially focusing on feedback from the retro. Of course, nothing gets fixed the first time you try, so we made this entire feedback loop a quarterly process. Retro to get qualitative feedback on our biggest pain points, data deep dive with those pain points in mind, tune the top alerts, and repeat. Doing this on a schedule prevents it from falling to the wayside and gives others assurance that they'll have clear channels to fix any problems that arise. It also prevents the accrual of ongoing process debt and gives space for the process to scale with the team. Noisy alerts that aren't relevant will naturally get tuned down through this process, making you less likely to get paged on them. I'm really excited to say that we have a more well-rested and a happier team, and I feel like we have much more agency to focus on planned work. And when we do get paged, there's a healthy skepticism from the team, so a lot of the time individuals feel empowered not to wait for the quarterly process and instead make small tweaks on their own. Our systems are also more robust, more observable, and have more clear ownership because we started taking accountability for the underlying issues. And of course, we've had a huge drop in pages. Notably, I wanted to share this chart of off-hours pages since January 2019, where the red line shows the quarterly totals. You can see that the pages after hours in the past few months are down to 0. This is all despite crazy, record-breaking traffic to the site thanks to COVID mask sales. I have a few personal takeaways that I wanted to share as well. The first being that process debt is real and it will happen to you. It doesn't just apply to on-call. What's important to you when you start a process doesn't stay important to you over time. And in this case, if you're only growing your set of pages and never archiving any, you're not evolving your rotation and you're definitely not moving with your people. Using the data-centered approach, as in focusing solely on decreasing the number of pages, doesn't always consider what needs to be changed to maintain team morale. It also doesn't hold management accountable for the safety of their people in that process, because it's a short-term fix to a long-term problem. And lastly, so many engineers on the team spent time volunteering to improve this process. I think it's because they saw the value it would have, which is a great reminder to bring people along when it's going to impact the way they work. So, with all of that, I invite you to listen to your people, to look out for those structural problems and patterns in what you've asked those people to do, and to consider taking a human centered commitment to solving them. Again, I'm Najla. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and thank you so much for listening.
Yay! Thank you so much for that, Najla. Awesome job on that. I
Thank
love
you.
hearing about these kind of process stories because it's very difficult because it's the side of engineering culture that you don't always get to hear at conferences, especially. It's always so much about the code, but if you don't have team trust and good processes, then no code will get produced.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of management problems are, or engineering problems actually end up being people problems. So that's why I wanted to focus on this.
Yes, exactly. And people are harder than code in a lot of different ways. And so, with your team, what has been just the outcome, either that you talked about in your talk or outside of everything we've talked about so far? Your favorite outcome, the best outcome of these team retrospectives with your team?
Yeah, my favorite outcome so far has been that the team has kept growing. We've added more people. So, after a few months of them actually starting work, we're like, okay, we're going to put you on call. And the best outcome is that they've been scared initially. And then after the first few days, they're like, oh, that was so easy. I knew exactly what to do. This all makes sense. And I think like that's a pretty gratifying experience to know that you're not putting people in a stressful situation pretty proactively.
Absolutely, and that's a sign of a good manager too. If it means that your people are happy at work, then that means they'll produce better work too.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of the actual tools that you use, do you use something like PagerDuty, or do you use other tools for all of your retros and for paging and on call and all kinds of stuff?
Yeah, we do use PagerDuty, and I have found that tools can be super powerful. So we used to do retros in Google Sheets, and it's interesting that like those are really flexible, but they're not anonymous. So we found an awesome tool called Retrium. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a really easy to use retro tool that anonymizes and democratizes conversations. And I just ended up using that tool for everything, and I learned anything can be a retro. So that's pretty much what we're using now.
I'm gonna ask you to drop a link to
Yeah,
that in the chat because
I'll
that
put
sounds
that in the
really
live
useful.
channel. Yeah, it is.
And also just being able to have that anonymous option kind of builds trust with the team anyway, because you get to talk about situations and then people are more willing to bring things up too.
Yeah, totally. I think the trust building is a really good point. I saw some people mention that in the chat as well, and especially when you have a bunch of new people, they don't even know how to talk to each other. Usually, they don't know much more than each other's names. So asking them to also
Right.
solve a complex on-call problem on top of that is a really big thing to do. So yeah, it starts with actually having those relationships built among the team.
Yeah. How much of this is brought up in the onboarding process, or is it something that a developer just kind of goes into eventually?
I'm pretty well. It starts with the offer process. So if we're hiring someone new, I always tell them you're going to be on call. We work in ads. We have like a big revenue commitment. So like that is part of. There's a lot of cool tech, but with it comes a lot of big responsibility. So it starts there, and then from the onboarding process, getting to know their peers and understanding how and why we're on call is a big part of it from the get go.
That's so great to bring it up so early in the process because there's no surprises where someone comes in, they're like, oh wait, I have to do on call or anything like that.
Yeah, we've all been surprised when we get to a job, so the less we can do that, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for your awesome talk. I know a lot of people were kind of just snapping like, yes, thank goodness someone said it. And there was so much to learn from it too. So thank you again so much for that.
Thank you all so much. It's been fun.
Great. Well, we are on to our afternoon break actually. So thank you so much for carrying us out and we are on to a break.